Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. Somehow it is a first-time guest. That's
Yeah.
on me. That's very much on me. It is KSR's Nick Roush, aka my favorite bald man in this business. Don't fact check me on that. Um,
There's a
Look,
lot of us. I don't know what it is. But there's the power rankings. We're working on them. I'm still trying to climb up them. I got a tall task at SEC Media Days. I think Pate has actually gone down the bald man rankings because CBS lost the SEC rights. So he's got some work to do.
I actually didn't even factor Pate into that conversation, so I might have to
Oh
revisit. Look,
wow.
I love Josh, but
Oh
look, you're
wow.
tied for first. You're tied
Okay,
for
there we
first
go.
at this point.
Good.
Okay.
I'll take it. I'll
Uh,
take it.
Speaking of SEC Media Days, when you asked Stoops to come home, the look he gave you at first was incredible because he did not know what it meant to come home. He was like, "What? Like, is he asking me if I'm going to Youngstown? Like, or what are we talking about? Like Iowa? Like, am I going? No, no, no. We don't talk enough about Stoops holding on for dear life with his hairline, and I'm very glad that you brought it into the universe.
The thing is, Connor, is it's never been great. It's it's the problem with Stoops. Bill Self, he got out in front of it, right? He
Yep.
nipped it in the bud right from the jump. Mark was just so busy grinding at Florida State that he forgot, and he couldn't plug it up before it started fading away. But you know what? Credit to Stoops, he's holding on for dear life. And when you're making, what is it, $8 million a year now, something like that, you
Nine.
can,
Yeah.
and that's just a dent into what he's making in bourbon right now. So, if you can wear hats in most settings, you're good. You're good. So he's holding on for dear life. But I did at least want to put that out there too, though, Connor, because I don't want I don't want Stoops getting too comfortable. Like he needs to make sure that the circle around him is still checking him, and maybe there for a while. Maybe that's why they've had a couple of lackluster seasons as of late, 7-6 the last 2 years, losing records in SEC play. Maybe that's why they're falling short. He doesn't have enough people checking him. I'm just doing my due diligence as first as a Kentucky fan, second as a reporter reporting the news.
Okay, counterpoint though, and this is something that I brought up a lot last year ad nauseum. It was a very popular offseason stat that I would default to. No bald coach has ever won the SEC championship. So think about that.
Hmm.
Maybe he's just trying to hold on to his last chance to win an SEC championship by hanging on to whatever hair he has left.
Man, and now I'm trying to think of bald coaches, and there aren't a ton out there, even though it's kind of in vogue now. But previously, I mean, Bobby Bowden, he kind of had a horseshoe, right?
But
Like,
yeah, I mean, not in the SEC, so that's he's
right.
immune from that. But
I'm just
you
trying to
go
think of.
back and look, lot
Oh, cool.
Spurrier, great head of hair, Saban,
Hmm.
great head of hair. That's like half of them right there.
Kirby right now is he's really entering middle age Georgia country club sort of look with his quaff. Um, Bald SEC coach Clark Lee. But there aren't a ton of
Not
them. I
happening.
don't. Football guys just lend themselves to having good hair, despite being in a profession where they wear ball caps 90% of the time.
Here's a question: Is Stoops bald by the time that he's done at UK?
I'm gonna say, well, it does the horseshoe count because he's really close to it right now. It's there's like a little
Hmm.
square.
Okay, the better way to phrase that. Is Stoops is Stoops making the choice to go bald with the look that you currently have? By the way, you should subscribe to Saturday Down South on YouTube so you can see Nick's lovely face
Hmm.
and head. But is he going with the look that you are going? Is he shaving his head actively? I think that constitutes as Stoop actually leaning into the bald.
So it's a little bit of a long shot. If I were to set wagers, which I'm in Kentucky, it's March Madness. There's a lot of wagering happening right now. I would put the odds at plus 550. No. But here's where I think it could happen. I think a lot of Kentucky's issues as of late, there has been this among, they're not the only program that's adjusting a nil, transfer portal, and whatever. And they've done a pretty good job. But there is sort of a camaraderie culture aspect that that hasn't been the same since they really kind of got things going. And so I think I could see that bet cashing, and Stoops going for that by doing a little, if we win X, I'm shaving my head. I could
Mm.
see Mark Stoops playing that card. Whether it's Tennessee's top 5, Heupel's got them rocking and rolling, and they go to Neyland and shock the world, or you know, I could see that scenario playing out. Kentucky gets a 10-win season, sneaks into the playoff, and Stoops shaves his head in celebration.
I like that. That's actually a really good idea. I hadn't thought of that. That would make a lot of sense. Let's talk about Stoops and his future, non-hair related things
Mm-hmm.
with Stoops. Longest tenured coach in the SEC now, which is a crazy thought, I bet. I outlined this. I think he's got 1 or 2 years left at Kentucky, and maybe he's going to retire. Maybe he's going to go to one of those like 2 or 3 jobs that would actually make some sense for him. But that's just based on the notion that I've gathered that NIL is kind of taking the joy out of coaching for blue collar coaches like him, and also the A&M part of this, which that context is important, and that's a move that, in my opinion, happens if a certain reaction is different. And that's, we can deny it here, we can deny it there, but I think that move happens. How long do you think Stoops is ultimately in Lexington?
It's a great question because the A&M stuff was very real, and it was one of those things where I had heard stuff. I actually spent most of my Thanksgiving Day trying to get people in Kentucky to give me anything. They did not want to, because there was a lot of smoke behind the scenes in College Station that was real, and that Ross Bjork had, seemingly found his guy. And there's part of you as, like I said earlier, I'm a fan first. I grew up watching this stuff. I got in this to be a fan. I didn't get in this to be a sport. KSR, we are very unabashedly not objective.
Yep.
So there's part of me as a fan that it would have been very disheartening to see the winningest coach ever leave and go to another job within the conference. But there's another part of me too that thought he couldn't leave on any better terms than what he just did. Because even though it was a duddy season, right? Like they had no business losing that South Carolina game. I saw him after that game, Connor, and he was sitting on the ground after his press conference with his hat in his hand. He was just sitting on the ground with Eddie Gran, his former OC and special assistant, just like he looked dead. Like they just sucked the life out of him. It was bad, and he looked like he was at the end of his rope, wondering what's next. And to go and upset Louisville and ruin their magical season again, right? They did it the Lamar Jackson year. They did it again to go 7-5. Still like that. That had a chance to leave on great terms, and then all the while you have the perfect successor lined up in John Summerall, where you get this kind of fresh injection where things were, kind of on the verge of getting stale. So when that fell apart, and then as far as offseason moves, he didn't really do anything aside from get a new receivers coach, right? And we had the whole Liam Cohen deal, and we can talk about it. He brought Wolford back, but we initially, Adam Luckett and I, we do a podcast together. It's a fun show. If you like Kentucky football, 11 Personnel, check it out. We were fully expecting this to be similar to what happened in 2015, where it was fire sale. Here's our last ditch effort to save our jobs. Instead, he kept almost everybody around. It's particularly the defensive side where they struggled. And it's not like people were wanting Brad White fired, because he's been pretty great most of his career. But there's just a lot of stuff there where you thought, how much is this? These feel like moves that, or the lack of moves, felt like something where maybe he's just going all in for another year or two, and then he's going to bolt. And when you look at the roster, if your listeners, viewers have any takeaways from this, Kentucky's roster, they're too deep this year, is just all 30-year players and above. It's the problems Kentucky has have not been rostered building wise. I know a lot of people like to bitch and moan about NIL and whatever. Kentucky's got as good as roster as they've had under Stoops going into this year if the quarterback hits. that's always a big if, right?
Yep.
Will Levis hit? Devin Leary obviously did not. If the quarterback hits, this roster is set up fantastically. But it's probably it for a lot of those guys, right? Like they should have, we were at the combine last week. They could have 10 guys, a dozen guys there next year with Deion Walker being the linchpin in the first round. So there's a lot of upperclassmen there. I can see this being a sort of last ride where, maybe this is it for Mark Stoops. I would not be surprised if this was the last season for the Kentucky head coach.
If he had left, and as you mentioned, Summerall is the obvious next guy in. He would make so much sense as a successor for Stoops. If let's just say hypothetically that there is a rolling list that Mitch Barnhart is working with. I like to think all athletic directors, when they've had a coach for like more than 5 years or 6 years, have some sort of a rolling list.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that list looks like outside of just someone that is such an obvious fit in Summerall?
Yeah, and we've mentioned him before. If you aren't familiar with John Summerall, played at UK for Rich Brooks, was assistant for Stoops, went to Troy, back-to-back Sun Belt titles. That just made all of the sense. And then after that, you wondered, would Liam Cohen, like how much would he be involved? But also, how do you want to go the offensive guy route, especially a guy who's bounced around a bunch? I mean, has Cohen had a job, like the same title for more than 2 years anywhere? I mean, so I think he would have been up for consideration. Pretty clear he wanted to get back to the NFL, though, a few weeks later. There was a couple other guys, and that's the part where I'm starting to blank. I think Brad White might have been whispered about. Kane Womack also
Yep.
kind of felt like it made sense. Kind of similar, where good defensive coordinator is great in the Sun Belt. That's a nice, like the Sun Belt feels like if you have success there, that's a great minor league to move up the coaching tree. So that one I think I also would have put on my short list. And then the timing might have actually worked out for somebody else too, in Neil Brown, where he kind of it's been an up and down sort of deal for him at West Virginia, but then I mean he was a dead man walking the entire last year, and then they went and won 9 games. So maybe if he didn't want to play with fire anymore, he could have decided to come home. So, but all in all, I'm going to think whoever succeeds Stoops is probably going to be a defensive guy that recruits well in the South. Like that, just from a culture standpoint, it worked well, and it feels like at Kentucky, where you're probably better off doing the up and comer at offensive coordinator every other year. Then like that's probably where you can max it out, right? Like maybe Bush Hamden's that guy, and he's an SEC coach in 3 years or something like that, So I think ultimately they would probably end up going the defensive coordinator route with a guy who can also recruit in the South.
Let me give you a five guys that I think would make sense if you're making that list now as opposed to coming up with it in December, where obviously things have changed since then. But a Blake Baker would make a lot of sense.
Yes.
I mean, keeping it within the Mizzou coordinator background realm, Kirby Moore would make a lot of sense, given his rise and what he did last year. Went 1-1 in our coordinator draft, our OC draft for the SEC, picked by yours truly. Someone like Glenn Schumann, as you mentioned, trying to get the defensive-minded guy. Like, I know everybody thinks that, Glenn Schumann's going to get a bigger, better job. Maybe he will one day. A core 4 job is hard to come by, and I think that he will be in pursuit of that in short time. And then Alex Golish is one to keep an eye on, friend of the program, but somebody that is, has these recruiting ties in the South. I know on the offensive side of the ball, I do kind of wonder, like, maybe Kentucky wouldn't want to necessarily go that route, but somebody that is
Tennessee way,
they want to dip into the Tennessee tree. And then Charles Huff is another one who, former recruiter of the year in all of college football, who has, ties all over the place at this point. That would make sense. Who's the guy of that 5 that you heard and you're like, yep, I could definitely see that person sitting down, having an interview and being like one of the most realistic candidates?
Huff and Schumann really jump out to me, and I think among folks who are really plugged into the coaching search realm, Huff particular, I was surprised he didn't get a job elsewhere the last cycle.
Me too.
Um, Schumann's he's a big like what's going to be the one, and Kirby has so much respect for Mark Stoops that I think he would tell him to go for it.
I think
Where
so too.
I think it might work out that way, and it's so funny too because this next Kentucky team, they're just like, let's try to be Georgia light. Let's get their backup quarterback, and let's go get the middle linebacker who just got recruited over, who is awesome for him.
Yeah.
So if Kentucky wants to just be Georgia light, there's a lot worse things to be. You know, people can hate on Bud Light all they want. It's cold. If it's cold, it's fine.
There's nothing wrong with a cold Bud Light, man, dude. Like
No.
I remember in college when you're drinking, Natty Light and Keystone and stuff like that, and the day that your fraternity brings in Bud Light instead of
Oh,
Natty Light or something like that,
big
you
day.
remember that Bud Light. Like that's that's the best Bud Light I've ever had in my entire life.
Oh man, that was a big day. Or like you know what, this weekend, guys, I'm gonna splurge. I'm gonna buy some Bud Light. We're gonna, and then if somebody showed up with a Mick Ultra, it's like, God, Daddy's money over there. Jeez.
Seriously, oh, you only want 85 calories? I guess enjoy your Mick Ultra. Now I would have a Mick Ultra like anytime and would gladly drink it. Same with the Bud Light. Okay, let's talk about that guy. Let's talk about Brock Vandagriff because there's been a lot said and written about him the last few months. There was a brief
Hmm.
moment where I was like, oh my God, is he going to leave after the Liam Cohen thing happens? Because he admitted to me like I did not think that was a possibility that he was going to perhaps go back to the NFL. But then you kind of factor in the family part of this. His sister is a half hour away playing volleyball at Eastern Kentucky. Like this is still a guy that's very much committed and locked into what Kentucky is doing. But where should we set expectations for him? Because I think ideally he's peak Will Levis, the guy that we saw in the latter half of 2021, and you're trying to avoid any world in which this is just another Devin Leary.
So I think the public face, the way that they speak about him, is there's gonna be a lot of brake pumping, because last year Devin Leary was incredible when it came to off the field training, workouts, etc. And so they got a little out in front of their skis there. And then when it came to executing game time, he struggled just getting plays in at times. So I think the brakes are going to be pumped there, but I don't think they should be. Kentucky, we're speaking Wednesday, March 13th. They start spring practice on Tuesday. So we're not going to get our first chance to speak with them until then. But the thing about, like, if you want to talk, like, people are always going to use the Will Levis comp because he had so much success in Lexington, and rightfully so. And so just to kind of draw those comparisons there, like Will Levis is talking about his errors and using the word matriculate when talking about throwing the ball down the field. Like, he's a very bright guy, and Devin Leary would do the Michael Scott thing where he would just like get words wrong, right? Or like the George W. Bush. Like last week at the combine, he tried to say that this has always been my MO, and he said this has been my memo, and it was like like it's whereas like Brock, he's not a finance major at Penn State or anything, but he's a coach's son who's very much all about his business, right? Like for his free time, he likes to go alone in the woods and be by himself and hunt animals, like that's his. But when it's time to work, he's got a very workman's like approach. And I think he has, there's been some talented guys, like guys that have the right stuff from a physical standpoint that have come through Kentucky, but between the years, it just hasn't worked for whatever reason. And I do think Bush Hamden's offense is going to be better set up for Brock Vandagriff than maybe Leary and Liam Cohen were. But I do believe that Brock Vandagriff should be. I mean, this was the guy that Lincoln Riley wanted to lead his offense, right? And you can't forget that. Like that, he has the pedigree, he has the tools, and the part that Kentucky fans in the SEC shouldn't sleep on is his running ability. I know he said with you, he was talking about, I got smoked, right? Like he got lit up at UK, and he's going to learn that balance. But Bush Hamden in his introductory press conference, he said the quarterback needs to be able to run for 3 first downs a game, and that Leary could kind of run around and dump it off, but having that little wrinkle there, I think it's just so important for a Kentucky offense that's just a fine offensive line that's not going to be one of the best in the league. Like you need to have that extra element on third downs in red zone situations. He's a great athlete. I think that extra little bit of oomph should make him an above average quarterback in the SEC.
I posed the question to him, like, do you see yourself as more of a Baker Mayfield, Bryce Young type, where it's more about like, hey, I'm going to stay behind the line of scrimmage, and then I want to preserve my ability to throw as much as humanly possible. Because the way that he first described himself, I'm like, how do you see yourself as a passer and fitting in? Because we just haven't seen this guy in like actual live reps.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm a pocket passer. But like, there's no way I'm going to be like, the Bryce Young thing where Bryce Young will leave 10 yards on the field that he can go and get because he has that much faith in his arm. He's like, if I got 10 yards, I'm going to go and get the 10 yards. Like, I'm not just going to leave that out there. But I am interested in how they're going to go about the design runs and all those different things, because you would think a player of his build, who is every bit whatever the metrics are going to say. I know he's not 230 like Will Levis, but you would think they're going to use that in the quarterback run game as an advantage, or at least try to. When you talk about picking up those 3 first downs per game, a quarterback should be able to do it. Do you think they end up using him the way that they used latter half of 2021 Will Levis, with more of those quarterback design runs, and try and make this guy into something that can be a little bit unique, because there are not a whole lot of guys that are going to run you over to try and get to a first down?
I think that will be the case, particularly just as there is uncertainty in the running back room. I know they got Ohio State running back Chip Trayanum, but there's uncertainty there. And 2, I think a lot of it is to try to be – Stoops has always been about balance. Whoever is going to call his offense, he wants to be about balance. And I think that just the quarterback run game is such a great way to open things up for your passing game. Because, you want to man up these guys? Okay, well, I'll take 10 yards, right? Like that sort of stuff, especially when the sort of the strengths of this offense should be speed at receiver and like big tight ends who are good at blocking and are solid pass catchers, right? Like that gives you enough to put the defense on their heels some. And the most important thing that Brock and Bush Hamden need to do, though, is just run more plays. I think the final tally was 53 total plays per game last year.
Can't have that.
No, it was just way too slow. They're going to be operating out of the no huddle. And I do think, a lot of the stuff's checked with me, and it's going to be different, as they do the quarterback helmet technology, like how they operate, some of that stuff. Like Josh Heupel is going to be talking to Nico while he's snapping the football, right? Like it's they're running so fast. But I do think there's a time where it's like, it's open to the left, snap it and run. Like what that should be a thing that Brock Vandagriff's able to do with this Kentucky offense.
I would think, the backup quarterback situation with Bo Allen back in the fold, I think that potentially makes a difference. How good do you feel about that situation? How can often dictate how much you're able to use that quarterback run game. That's definitely a big part of it. Let me give you a hypothetical here.
Ooh, love hypotheticals.
You're going to love this one too. What is more likely? Brock Vandagriff becomes Kentucky's first all-SEC quarterback since Andre Woodson, or you on public airwaves, this would be included in that, say something nice about Shane Beamer.
Brock Vandagriff, all-SEC quarterback. And we do this every year, but it's not quarterback power ranking season just yet, but Jackson Dart, Carson Beck, and I forgot about Ewers though. See, that's going to take me a minute. The Texas and Oklahoma wrinkle, because I can't stand Shane Beamer. I just can't. It's one thing that me and Mark Stoops share in common, aside from our lack of hair. It's just our hatred for Shane Beamer, because that dude is such a goober, and I cannot believe Kentucky's lost to him twice in a row. And at least the first year, Levis is hurt that game, and they call a stupid trick play on the first snap that goes awry, and you're like, okay, like, all right, you're going to lose one of those every once in a while. Kentucky controlled that game for 3 quarters last year and lost. Like just was so stupid in so many ways. And South Carolina hasn't been good. Like they really haven't. They played very well down the stretch, but I don't think they're going to be that good this year. I mean, they're going to have to rely on Lenore Sellers to do everything. Like, there's just the part 2. So I don't know if I've ever shared this story either.
Please do.
But Mark Stoops, when him and Shane Beamer had that initial tiff, right, where Stoops was being very genuine. He was being genuine when he said, like, hey, I really didn't mean anything about, like, Stoops is very much, he doesn't pay any attention to what's happening online. I don't think he was checking to see the South Carolina video beforehand, but he said he legitimately did not know that it was unintentional shot at Beamer. So afterwards, he said he called Beamer and, like, privately they spoke, and he's like, listen, man, I'm sorry, like, apologized, and everything was apparently good, right? What made Stoops mad was that Shane Beamer was, oh, you know what, Mark, that's fine, we're good now. No big deal. Don't have to make a big deal of it. And what does Shane do? He makes a big deal out of it. He brings the sunglasses. He does the dancing again. And, granted, if you don't want him to wear the sunglasses, just beat him. But Stoops is very upset that they seemingly squashed things privately, but then publicly Shane was a goober, because that's all he knows how to be. I really just can't stand him. And you know what? The thing that I'm actually looking forward to here that I think is a great exercise and should be a big talking point when you do your, like, SEC talking points for each team is, and I hate that I always forget his name, but the special teams coordinator left.
Pete Lembo left. Pete Lembo to take the job at Buffalo once upon a time, the Ball State head coach. Yeah.
Yes. How much of Beamer ball is Shane Beamer versus how much of it is Pete Lembo? Because, like, that's a fair question. And you know what? You do got to give, like, I will give Beamer credit in saying it feels like he gets the most out of his guys. But I do think that is overcoming that loss. I think that's a legitimate concern that the Gamecocks are going to face this fall.
I should just clip that 4 seconds when you said Beamer gets the most out of his guys. That counts.
Well, that's also kind of a backhanded compliment. So I wouldn't be the maddest. But that, all of my personal anti-Shane Beamerness aside, that's the biggest game of the season for Kentucky. Week 2, South Carolina. Like, if you want to get where you're going, you have to win that game. No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Yeah, people get offended when you say stuff like that in the preseason about, teams like that. And it's like, well, Georgia's not the biggest game on the schedule. If Georgia's going to be the biggest game on the schedule, it's going to be because X, Y, and Z happened before that, and those were monumental games to get to that place.
Exactly. Like, College Game Day doesn't go to Georgia for Kentucky, Georgia, if Kentucky doesn't take care of business beforehand, right? Like that, you have to stack them up. And same thing for Missouri. Like, how huge was Mevis kicking that field goal at Kansas State? Because, like, Drinkwitz is kind of similar to me, where, like, he kind of just rubs me the wrong way, and you're just like, but he blew that. He blew that, and Mevis bailed him out.
Yep.
Like, how big they can't do what they did unless Mevis is the lifesaver for them, gave him a lifeline. The thicker kicker from, was that 62?
I think it was 62.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that guy, he's incredible.
Friend of the show, Harrison Mevis, the thicker kicker.
Is he back?
No, he's off. He's off to the NFL. No, he had eligibility on the table and said, "Nope, I'm ready."
We need him sticking around. It disheartened me when Hot Rod couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Like I need my kickers to be characters. Maybe that's why they don't stick around.
Yeah. Will Reichert's gone too. Open door for elite kickers in the SEC. Just sitting right there for the taking. I was going to ask you who you dislike more between Beamer and Drink, but I think it's Beamer at this point. Drink, you can't even dislike as much anymore because of what happened with Mizzou this past season.
Well, and that's part of it too. And now I've got an offensive coordinator in Lexington that's from the Drinkwitz coaching tree, right?
Yep.
So there's got to be a little bit of and Jamori Macklin started his career at Missouri, the transfer from North Texas recently. So, and part of it too is just Drinkwitz has been better, right? I mean, Beamer had a great end to was that his first or second season? It was 2 years ago, but They
Beamer had year 2, wherein the Tennessee and Clemson victories
yeah,
happened, and this past year was year 3. Yeah.
they got that big pop in year 2, but it's nothing like what Drinkwitz did. Uh, Really, the part with Drinkwitz that just irritates me is when he just tries to go viral. And he tries to. That's the part about me. It's one thing if you're gonna like when Shane Beamer, my first introduction to Shane Beamer was when he went viral after the Georgia game. And he was like, "Have you seen those guys?" And he was at least being him. It's a goober. But when Drinkwitz gets up there and is just like, well, kids these days, and he goes on, he's like this moral arbiter of good and bad. When he goes up and tries to do that, it's like, Eli, just do the football coach thing. We don't need you coming. And if you want to pull out a lightsaber every once in a while, if you want to poke fun at Dan Mullen or whatever, like I'm even cool with that. It's sometimes we got to learn lessons the hard way, and it's like, dude, you're gonna take an awesome transfer. That's gonna be great for you. Like, so don't. The store swings both ways, buddy. That's the part that really irritates me. But I'll give him, and I guess how much credit does he get versus Kirby Moore? But like, did not see that out of Brady Cook at all last year, and that's it. To tie it back to Kentucky fans, there's part of Kentucky fans that are like, "What the hell? Why can't Drinkwitz is doing that? Why isn't that us?" But I think on the other side of the coin, it does show that hey, there's a path for you to have a season like this if things hit right.
Especially in the 12-team playoff, those conversations they're different now.
Yeah.
The upside is just, it feels so much different in the way that games will be talked about in November if you can get to that point. Let me get you out of here with this one. I doubt you've been asked this before,
Ooh.
and you're the perfect person to ask this to. I was one of many that for the last year and a half, I've been saying that if there is a college football version of John Calipari, that it is Jimbo Fisher. But we got to put that to bed now because that guy's got 77 million reasons to just sit on his ranches and do absolutely nothing. But I have a new college football version of Cal, and I'm curious if we have the same answer. Does any immediately come to mind for you?
See, because I did, I fell for the Jimbo thing too. That comp initially, but Cal has shown a little bit of pluckiness as of late. Because this team's rocking and rolling. So I'm trying to think of it's not Chip Kelly, even though
No,
I
it's
thought
not.
he was having that pop with DTR and co.
You know who it is?
Who
It's
is it?
Dabo. It's Dabo. Yep, because think about this from this standpoint. And I realize that Clemson football pre Dabo is very different than Kentucky basketball
Correct.
pre Cal. Like I'm fully acknowledging that, but guy that dominated the 2010s in ridiculous, absurd ways, and then in the 2020s, it's been an entirely different story, wherein the fan base is admittedly frustrated. The adapt or die mantra that gets talked about more so probably with Dabo than it does with Cal. But with Cal, there was style questions, outside shooting questions, stuff like that. And where there is a very different national discussion about that coach than there is among the fan base and among those that consume it. And it feels very, and we'll kind of wait and see how this plays out this year with Kentucky basketball. I guess maybe we'll see how next year plays out with Clemson football post Tyler from Spartanburg, calling in. They haven't lost since then. Just saying,
Yeah,
Kentucky
that's
knows
true.
this all too well. Like if there is this past their prime, but you can't fire them because of what they have done for the program, and this sense of angst that is felt because insiders don't feel like outsiders get it, and outsiders are telling insiders to shut up and be happy.
It will be the perfect comp if Garrett Riley runs Garrett Riley offense next year because that's really like Cal obviously not as reticent as Dabo was with the transfer portal. His stubbornness was you have to play a bunch of 7-footers, right?
Yes.
And like that was sort of his. And now he's got. I mean, Reed Shepard's shooting more than 50% from three. Like they're just raining threes down from left and right. Antonio Reeves, Rob Dillingham playing guards all over the place. Justin Edwards is now shooting almost 40% from three. So if Dabo, because really Cal tried to do the portal thing, and it it didn't work. I mean, yes, Oscar Sheba was National Player of the Year. They had a good regular season, but that style didn't work for him. He went back to one and done, and it worked well. So maybe it's a thing where maybe Dabo doesn't actually need to do the portal like we're all telling him he needs to. He just can't have his hand telling Garrett Riley what to do. We got to have our offense this way. We got to, because that's I think the more legitimate criticism of Dabo is just the internal, like it's got to be this way the whole time. Where they're very much in common too is that they can be so full of crap sometimes behind the microphone. And I love John Calipari, but sometimes it's just like, Cal, what are you doing, man? Like he did the whole like I'm going to flex after the Auburn game, and then like I'm just not going to go show up to the press conference after the next one. Like it's him and Dabo both. They have a way of just like my favorite thing, and I say this tongue in cheek, is when you ask Cal a question. You're like looking for a Reed Shepherd quote, and he's like, "How about DJ Wagner?" And you're just like, Cal, can you just answer the question, please? But I don't think you're too far off, Mr. O'Gara. Although I'm not wishing for a Clemson resurgence, quite like I am for a Kentucky one. But hey, Clemson can do it, right? Like, hey, how hard is it to win in the ACC? Florida State showed us not very.
One would think that is on the table. National championship upside is a very, very different story. But if we're just talking about getting back in the playoff, who knows? Maybe it's very much out there for Dabo. This was great, man. This was a lot of fun. We got to do this way more often. You're going to be in Dallas in a few months for SEC Media Days, right?
Yeah. Well, yes. I'm having a kid around that time, but we need the baby to stay in long. Yeah.
You got number 3 on the way?
Yeah. We're doing it. Wow. August. So I'm hoping to sandwich SEC Media Days, football Media Days into like, you get into like week 2 of fall camp. Like we need week 2 of fall camp, baby, because those stories, they get a little redundant, a little monotonous. So baby, just hang in there for a while because need to be in Dallas. Love SEC Media Days. And I've only been to Texas once in my life, and that was when Kentucky lost in overtime to Texas A&M back in 2018 with Benny Snell and co. So need to get down, have some Lone Star beers, maybe catch some home run balls at the Derby. I don't know. Everything people tell me about Dallas is that like nothing is actually in Dallas. Like it's all
Arlington, surrounding area. Yeah, that's the lowdown as well. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll figure it out. We'll have a good time regardless. We'll find some place to karaoke. They got to have karaoke bars in Dallas somewhere.
Chris Budden is on it for us. She lives in Dallas. She's going to take care of it for us. She has already confirmed that we'll make sure that we got our karaoke, and that the tradition is not going to die, in the true Southeast the way that we refer to it. So that's all that really matters.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Nick, we'll do this again soon, man. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.